What's up, everybody? Oh, the Jets. The Jets, the Jets, the Jets. That's what everybody's been dropping in the comments for the last few deep dive reveals, saying, how the hell are you this high on the New York Jets? And yes, I am high on the Jets. They come in with the number 5 spot here in my power rankings heading into the 2024 NFL season. Going to be a really fun deep dive to discuss this team, discuss this roster, and why it is that I do believe in the Jets being, honestly, at this point, a bit of a post-hype sleeper after where we were with this team this time of year last year, and of course, 4 snaps into their season when Aaron Rodgers' Achilles popped. Should be a very fun deep dive. Before we do get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button, I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video or have been enjoying the series, it's a very easy way and a free way to support my channel. It really does help. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As always, taking a look at this team's offseason. And in the case of the Jets, I think a lot of the people that think the Jets are overrated are sleeping on how much better this team got over the offseason. Now, while I am higher on the Jets, ironically, the very first thing we talk about in the pecking order of things is maybe the worst thing about this team and this team's offseason, and that is that the coaching staff is staying neutral. They choose to retain Nathaniel Hackett for Aaron Rodgers, his best buddy there, running the offense, really the two of them together. And we saw what a Nathaniel Hackett offense looks like in Denver. It was putrid, and we had to see it again last year removed from Aaron Rodgers. Yes, they didn't have a great situation by any stretch of the imagination, but they were like running into a hurricane. They couldn't get anything to work. So it's retained from last year. It's not downgraded. Hopefully it'll be a little bit better, of course, with Aaron Rodgers' chemistry with him and having Aaron Rodgers as a quasi-play caller within this offense. But the coaching staff itself is staying neutral, and you could definitely make the case that if this thing goes awry, not getting in Aaron's ear a little bit and being like, hey, we respect you, but we're going to give you a real offensive coordinator here to help you, could be something that ultimately holds this team back. But beyond that, this offseason was really under the radar incredible for the Jets. Just from the quarterback perspective alone, they go from Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Siemian. These guys were in a week-to-week competition with the Falcons for the worst quarterback play in the league. And they get back not just Aaron Rodgers, which is obviously a massive improvement. I think whatever you think about Aaron Rodgers, it's a huge improvement. And Tyrod Taylor, who him alone would be an upgrade from whatever they had last year as the backup here. They did learn their lesson in that sense of, okay, if Aaron goes down, let's have a competent veteran to run the offense. So you don't need me to explain why the quarterback room is massively upgraded, but it obviously is, and is a resounding reason for my optimism on this team. But then at running back, I left this as neutral. You do have some changing parts. Dalvin Cook and Michael Carter were let go in the back end of last season, and they did spend a pair of early day 3 picks on Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin and Isaiah Davis. Then at tight end, they let go of CJ Uzomah, and they didn't add anybody to the tight end room. I do want to note for the tight end room and really any spot throughout this deep dive, I'm recording this at 3:40 Eastern time, Wednesday the 28th. So they only have 2 tight ends on the roster. I imagine they're looking around at cuts and will probably bring in a tight end 3 somewhere. But maybe they'll bring CJ Uzomah back. I don't know, but there will probably be a name in there within the next couple of days that they do add. At wide receiver, definitely upgraded. I mean, Randall Cobb gave them nothing. They lose him, and they add Mike Williams in free agency and draft Malachi Corley in the 3rd round. So some nice additions to the weaponry, much needed additions to the weaponry. And then for the offensive line, again, I say massively upgraded. They did lose a couple baseline mid starters from last year. Laken Tomlinson and Mekhi Becton played a lot of snaps for them. Was actually surprised to see that Becton made it through 89% of their snaps healthy, and Laken Tomlinson 99% of their snaps. So they were the only real baseline starters that they had in the offensive line. They do lose those guys, and Connor McGovern, decent enough center, but he only played a third of their snaps last year. But their additions are crazy, man. They get Tyron Smith, one of the kind of lands of free agency. They're able to sort of pry him away from Dallas, who I think wanted to retain Tyron Smith, who had I can't say a career year because he's had a Hall of Fame career, but he definitely bounced back to look kind of close to what he was in his prime. So even if you're going to miss some games for him, that's a huge addition. Reminds me of Miami getting Teron Armstead in free agency a little bit. But then they steal Morgan Moses from the Ravens, who I've been saying on this channel for the last 2 years, really since he left the Jets the first time, that he's one of the more underrated players in the entire NFL. I, for the life of me, don't understand why the Ravens, sent him away for a mid-round draft pick. A great move by the Jets. They do get Elijah Vera Tucker back for now. We'll see if he can stay healthy. That's been an issue for him, but he's healthy now. Talented guard when he plays. He only played 23% of their snaps last year. And then they also spent a first-round pick on a really talented Olu Fashanu, who would probably be a top 8 pick in pretty much any draft class. This just happened to be a crazy draft at the top. So they get the best backup tackle in the NFL, basically, that could be their future left tackle as well. These are like wild additions for an offense here. And then you look at the defensive side of things, and they're mostly status quo with what was one of the best defenses in the NFL last year that dragged the Jets to 7 wins despite being on the field constantly. And overall, they might be turned down maybe 2% from what they were last year, but even in the positions that they lost talented players, they added people as well. So on the interior of the defensive line, they do let Quentin Jefferson go. They actually gave Javon Kinlaw a decent sum of money, like 1 year, $7.2 million. He had a mini breakout for the Niners last year after being a bit of a bust of a first-round pick. Robert Saleh is familiar with him. They bring him in. Very similar type of player to Quentin Jefferson as that pocket-pushing, rotational pass rusher that doesn't really stop the run. But they do get younger than Quentin Jefferson, who's into his 30s. So I do say neutral in terms of the output from the interior of the defensive line. On the edge, I say slightly downgraded. I think they're trying to open up some snaps for their first-round pick, Will McDonald, last year. And Franklin Myers does play some from the interior as well, although less than I expected to see. It was really only about 20% of his snaps. They have the depth to make a decision like this. It was obviously something, they got a future 6th-round pick for him. Like, they essentially cut him to save cap. They clearly feel like they're equipped to replace what they got from him. But it is a productive piece from last year's defense that wasn't necessarily replaced here. Now, the Bryce Huff for Hassan Reddick swap was an interesting one. Huff signs with the Eagles in free agency, and then the Eagles trade Hassan Reddick to the Jets. I am going to operate under the assumption that Hassan Reddick will take the field for the Jets. I don't think he has that much leverage. And ultimately, I think they might work something out as well to get him on a contract that he's happy to play under. Obviously, something to monitor. But beyond that, he definitely makes sense as a swap for Bryce Huff, 2 very talented kind of pass rush specialists. You could certainly argue Hassan Reddick is an upgrade from Bryce Huff, but I don't know that it quite makes up for the difference in losing John Franklin Myers. We'll break down this whole defensive line later on. Ultimately, I'm not too worried about it, but I do think, 2 bodies is better than 1 in this case, and it is slightly downgraded. At linebacker, literally no change at all. You love to see that. It's a good room. Same thing with corner. All they did was add an interesting 5th-round pick in CFL superstar Quantez Stiggers. And then at safety, I do think Jordan Whitehead overall is just better than Chuck Clark, ever so slightly. So I do say that's slightly downgraded, especially with Chuck Clark coming off of an injury, but he's had more than enough time to recover. He got hurt around this time last year before the season even started. Pretty close to an eye for an eye, and nothing I'm horribly worried about, but Whitehead did make some plays for them, and they don't have him back. They did bring in Isaiah Oliver, and then I guess in the process of making this video, Jalen Key got released. I do imagine he'll be back in the practice squad. That was Mr. Irrelevant. We'll just leave him up there on the graphic. He'll be around as a call-up opportunity, I'm sure. And then special teams staying neutral as well. So I think you can start to see the kind of framework for why I'm even more optimistic about this Jets team this year than I was last year. Last year, we headed into the season with a lot of questions about the offense. You look at their offseason, they got a lot better there and didn't get really worse on the defense, with the exception of John Franklin Myers, that I think they have a very sound plan to replace him. But we will dive into the roster position by position, break down this team in depth. But first, I do want to talk about this coaching staff. In general, this is a point of negativity when people discuss the Jets. And I think when it relates to Nathaniel Hackett, as we already talked about a little bit, that is more than fair. But I do think it's kind of carried over to Robert Saleh a little bit in a bit of an unfair way. And you could argue it's his job to make sure he has a good offensive coordinator to support him as the defensive mind. But I also just don't know just how much power he has to do that within the structure of this organization with Aaron Rodgers. It's kind of a deal with the devil that they've made, bringing in an Aaron Rodgers who, a big part of why he's so happy is that he gets a say in some of this stuff. So it is a trade-off, but I think if you're a Jets fan, you're like, I'd still rather have Aaron Rodgers and deal with Nathaniel Hackett as the offensive coordinator and deal with paying Allen Lazard a little bit than, Jesus, I don't know, Jacoby Brissett as your quarterback. Where would they be without that, right? So it's still a trade-off you'll make. But back to Robert Saleh, he's a great freaking defensive mind, man. I don't fully understand all the hate he gets. And you guys know I'm as big of a give me the offensive head coach. I think it builds a larger and more sustainable long-term window to have that offensive guru as your dude at the top of the food chain with your coaching staff. But I have also consistently held, if you are going to have a defensive head coach, the dude better be an elite defensive coach, and Robert Saleh absolutely is. He was for years in San Francisco. I think he was integral in the sort of restoration of the defensive culture in San Francisco that had completely fallen by the wayside from 2016 to 2018. I think Saleh really got that organization set on the right path defensively. And then the job he's done with this Jets defense is incredible. His first season was not great. I had my questions about his early impact with this Jets team, but very similar to what we're seeing with Matt Eberflus and the Bears. Sometimes it takes work to let your coaching influence kind of spread throughout the team, throughout the organization. And by year 2, you saw it, and that was before Aaron Rodgers was ever here. I mean, the 2022 New York Jets defense was excellent. And then you have last year where you have all this hype. You've constructed this entire offensive framework really under the wing of Aaron Rodgers with all of his guys, Nathaniel Hackett and Allen Lazard. The engine of that whole idea is taken away from you 4 snaps into the season, and this was an unwatchable offense for essentially 18 straight weeks, other than that showing against the Chiefs where Zach Wilson switched jerseys with Patrick Mahomes for a night. But honestly, as all this was happening, I got a lot of respect for Robert Saleh, because that defense so easily could have just crumbled, right? When you were on the field constantly and you had all these hopes ripped out right up from under you like that, this team so easily could have folded, and Robert Saleh didn't let that happen. This defense continued to play extremely hard. They were still one of the best defenses in the league, and they kept this team's season alive. They went 7-10 with, I would say, let's just say, tied for the worst quarterback play in the league, among plenty of other issues as well on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that just goes overlooked a lot, because I've seen a lot of people saying Robert Saleh is like this terrible coach, and ranking the Jets 5th is stupid because of Robert Saleh. And I'm like, I mean, you can have your other reasons, but I think he's a really solid to good overall head coach and a great defensive mind. Now, do I think he's established himself as the forever coach of the New York Jets? No, I don't. But I still think he's a very good NFL head coach, kind of smack dab in the middle, ranking 17th for me. And as you'll see, the defensive rankings, from a coaching perspective, are very high on the Jets. They get 2nd to 6th for pass defense coaching and 6th to 10th for run defense coaching. So I got to defend Saleh a little bit. You also have to note, by the way, they have Jeff Ulbrich, who, as soon as this Jets team starts winning football games, Ulbrich is going to be getting head coaching interviews, unless he's just happy to be right next to Robert Saleh, coaching up the linebackers out of the spotlight, kind of like Chris Kachurik was under Saleh in San Francisco. But the job Jeff Ulbrich has done with linebackers, from Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Deion Jones in Atlanta, to now CJ Mosley having some of his best career years, and Quincy Williams playing it like an all-pro last year, one of the most respected position coaches in the league. This is, in my mind, a defensive coordinator caliber guy next to Robert Saleh. This is an excellent assistant, kind of quasi-head coach of the defense caliber guy next to him that makes this all the better on the defensive mind. I think they have a great sort of chemistry between the two of them, and their vision for this defense is very consistent together. So I love that. I think he will be a head coach in the league someday at 47 years old. And we have seen teams around the league looking to replicate this scheme, right? The Niners have continued to run it. The Texans with DeMeco Ryans, who was under Robert Saleh. The Packers just hired someone that was a part of that staff under Saleh in Jeff Hafley to be their defensive coordinator. The Jets obviously were looking to replicate this scheme. I think any team that wants to, get a little bit of this defensive system, Jeff Ulbrich can be that next guy. And that's another testament to Robert Saleh, by the way. Anytime you have a coaching tree running your scheme in the league, that speaks volumes to what you're accomplishing X's and O's wise. And with that, we should talk about what Saleh's scheme is a little bit. So at the core, it's a 4-2 defense, but they love to kind of spread out those D linemen a little bit. They love wide 9 fronts in New York, and they love running stunts from those wide 9 alignments. Whether you're taking that kind of 4-eye or a 3-tech who's lined up in between the tackle and the guard, and using that defensive end to be the disruptor, kind of slant him at the tackle, but the guard still has to, block the guy. And then you're taking those edge rushers and wrapping them in behind them. Your classic TE stunt there, your tackle end stunt. But they'll run ET stunts where the end is the disruptor and the defensive tackle is an athletic body. Someone like a John Franklin Myers or Quinnen Williams or Javon Kinlaw, Quentin Jefferson. They love these athletes up front. And they love a guy like Jermaine Johnson, who can come in from a wide alignment, just collapse the tackle into the guard, and then that athletic defensive tackle is going to wrap around the outside and get a free rush. They run coffee house stunts off of that, where you're faking like you're going to do one thing, and then you get the guards or the tackles to over account for that, pass the guy off, and then all of a sudden they just passed off a free rusher. Robert Saleh, going all the way back to San Francisco, has been a true master at running stunts up front and really crafting his defensive front in a way that just is an absolute head case to block. And that same sort of mentality applies to their run defense. They play with these lighter bodies in the trenches. And this is exactly what we talked about with the Texans deep dive, where this system allows them to have some of these lighter defensive tackle bodies while still stopping the run, because they just ask these guys to split gaps. They have these guys slanting in a bunch of different directions right at the snap, basically causing chaos at the snap, making it, creating that feeling like you are running into a hurricane, deleting that sort of normalcy in the run game where, okay, it's duo, we got the guard in the center, we're just going to go, take this 3-tech and climb right up to the linebacker. Well, they'll throw wrinkles in all those rules by slanting guys out of position and tapping into their athleticism more so than their play strength and size. And if you're going to do that, you have to have nasty, heady linebackers like a CJ Mosley, Quincy Williams, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. DeMeco Ryans is trying to recreate that in Houston as well with those dudes. It's a non-negotiable part of this defense to have really good linebackers in a defense like this. And another thing that this mentality is really effective for is, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but I wanted to bring it up at some point in this deep dive series because it's a thought I've had watching these defenses this summer. There is this play action revolution in the NFL, and a big reason play action is so effective is because it helps out your pass protection. Most teams, when they see run, their defensive linemen by default are going to be playing horizontally, gap discipline, right? They won't be rushing upfield like you would in a passing situation. Well, if this is your approach, where even against the run, you're splitting gaps and getting upfield, if teams want to run play action on you, they are going to lose the advantage of, forcing D linemen to play horizontally. These defenses want to play north and south and get aggressive, and it I think is a very under the radar reason these types of kind of 4-2 fronts work really well in the league right now. That was a lot, but I just have a lot of respect for what they do with their front in New York. But from a coverage perspective, it is actually a lot of cover 4, which I've had my criticisms of with a lot of the kind of Vic Fangio tree coaches, but they're smart about cover 4. They don't run it on 3rd and 2 and give you a free release. Like, they understand the weaknesses of cover 4 where it will open up those underneath throws much more. So they'll either not call cover 4 in those situations, or they will press out of cover 4 and trust these corners to be on an island outside. And then it kind of grants these safeties permission to kind of lurk underneath. So their cover 4 oftentimes looks a lot different than you'll see from like a Vic Fangio or Joe Barry or someone like that. And when you have DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner, you can do that because it is dangerous to press out of cover 4. It's essentially like cover 0. Where if you do get beat over the top, you're not going to have safety help if they're running, down the boundary. But if they got the guys to do it, why not? So obviously the utmost respect for the defensive coaching here for the Jets. Now, offensively, it's a much shorter and much more negative conversation. Now, I do actually put Aaron Rodgers up there as a part of the offensive coaching. And I do think things will look better than what they did in New York last year because they can't look any worse. But Aaron Rodgers is a very particular quarterback. And you hear people say with Rodgers all the time, like, he's an offensive coordinator's worst nightmare because he needs the power to, like, change the offensive play. And you can never get into a rhythm as an offensive mind. You can't really set stuff up because he's just going to muddy up your game plan. And, I think if Matt LaFleur is your offensive coordinator and he's shown what he's shown now without him, you might have a point to make there, right? But not everybody can have a Matt LaFleur, for one. But also, like, it's not like Rodgers walking up to the line of scrimmage, taking 20 years of knowledge as, at this point, the highest IQ quarterback in the league within what I believe to be a photographic memory. It's not like saying, okay, walk up to the line with basically two options on the play, look at the defense, and go with the call that's going to work against that coverage, and then also have all these little subtle hand signals that you've repped with your receivers that teams can't key off on. It's not like that's not a really effective thing to have. And that was a real thing still working for Aaron Rodgers in Matt LaFleur's offense. For him to basically walk up to the line of scrimmage, look at the defense, and then give a certain smile or, touch his hip or scratch his nose, and Devontae Adams knew, all right, I need to change my route to what Aaron's expecting here. That's freaking, like, unique and uncoverable. So there is an asset here that is probably, like, not appreciated enough. And they were counting on having that last year, right? They were like, well, we know Nathaniel Hackett's not a great offensive mind, but he knows what Aaron likes to do because he was there in Green Bay. He'll let Aaron do what he wants to do. And sure, that's not going to result in perfect scheming and, top 10 offensive coaching, if you will, and constantly getting guys open for him and using pre-snap motion in creative ways and all these predictive play calls and all that stuff that is good to have within your offense as well. But it's going to provide a unique aspect that no other team has as well, and an uncoverable aspect in many ways. So I do put him up there. It is a real thing. Yes, Nathaniel Hackett is still designing the plays and putting in the playbook, putting in the plan, calling the plays. But Aaron is going to have just as much power within this offense to put this thing together. So we'll see how it kind of looks. I'm not going to rank them very high. They're dead last in both pass game and run game coaching. And I actually think it could be better than that. I think it could be something like the 18th best run offense, which would obviously be a massive improvement here. But that would be because of Aaron Rodgers' influence, not because of Nathaniel Hackett. It's a very unique conversation. From a schematic point of view, it's really hard to even say what the scheme is going to be. I do imagine the core of the run game will still be that under center, wide zone stuff. And I think Aaron himself grew to appreciate a lot of the wide zone play action stuff within that LaFleur offense. So I imagine we'll still see a lot of that. And that's kind of what the scheme was when Rodgers went down, was they just kind of reverted to the Matt LaFleur playbook without all of the other good stuff that Matt LaFleur brings to the table. So I do imagine we'll see some of those kind of Shanahan influences as well. But we'll probably see a lot of the kind of old Mike McCarthy stuff too, where it's like, all right, we're just calling slant flats and Garrett Wilson's on basically a hot route from Aaron Rodgers, going to make a couple checks. If it's not there, Aaron's going to improvise. It might not sound like much, and sometimes it isn't, but that's also just a large part of what's made Aaron Rodgers a first ballot Hall of Famer. So again, very unique conversation to have there. Should be fun to continue to monitor this season. But that does make for a very easy transition into the roster breakdown, where we do start with the quarterback. So we can start to talk about Aaron a little more as a passer here. And, for those that think the Jets at number 5 is too high, I would say 90% of you, it's just because you don't trust that Aaron Rodgers' Achilles is going to hold up. And honestly, if that's your opinion on it, I can't really argue with you about that. You got a gut feeling that thing's going to pop again and they're going to be back to where they were last year. More power to you. For me, I don't see any reason to believe that that's going to happen. Like Kirk Cousins popped his Achilles 2 months after Aaron Rodgers, and nobody's talking about him not being able to stay on the field for the Falcons. So I am looking at this from the lens that Aaron Rodgers is going to be there for the Jets. And it's also really hard to know, like, if the Achilles popped because he's 40 or if it was just bad luck. It was a non-contact injury, right? That happens to 21-year-olds. So that is obviously a critical factor here, but I am operating under the assumption that he is going to stay healthy, that it is unlikely that he has a season-ending injury again. He might get banged up, and that's why it's great that Tyrod Taylor is here. But having followed Rodgers' career thoroughly, growing up a Packers fan, really kind of fell in love with the game because of Aaron Rodgers being in his prime. Honestly, I don't even know if this channel exists without Aaron Rodgers being the player he was in his prime. And I'm at this point, I'm very open to the fact that, like, I'm an Aaron Rodgers truther. Like, I got the jersey right there. I want to see him get another ring. I hate the way people discuss the last 3 years of his career and finally kind of playing poorly in playoff games. They act like that's his whole career. I'm very open at this point about the fact that I'm an Aaron Rodgers homer. And if you want to just ignore my analysis on this entire team because of that, that's your own prerogative. But I will say, because I am such an Aaron Rodgers apologist, I do bring a unique perspective, and I can say with confidence that I have watched every single dropback of this player's career, every single one. And there are not 3 better quarterbacks in the history of the NFL when a healthy Aaron Rodgers takes the football field. Hell, I would go as far as arguing Patrick Mahomes is the only one that has a case. And I know without a doubt, as we have Aaron Rodgers ranked right here as the 7th overall quarterback in the league with kind of a medical flag, kind of ranking him out with some regression factored in here as an 86 graded player, that's nowhere near the caliber of quarterback that Aaron Rodgers is capable of playing at. And is, by the way, not far removed from playing at that level. And this is the other part of this conversation, is how good is Aaron Rodgers now today? Again, I think there is some regression there, right? Like, I think his arm is reduced maybe 5-10% of what it was in his prime. Like I said, I've watched every throw of this guy's career. I can tell, what his fastball looks like now compared to what it did in 2014. It's still great, but it's not what it was back then. And from a mobility perspective, the last 2 years of his career, he couldn't quite break as many sacks. He wasn't quite as athletic on the run, but still his pocket presence gives him an elite ability to manage that pocket, to buy time within the pocket. Still, to me, the best pocket presence in the NFL. There's not a quarterback in the history of the league, in my opinion, that is good at feeling that pressure, maneuvering that space, buying an angle here, stepping up there, knowing when he needs to get out of the pocket, but also knowing when he's got great protection, he can trust it, he can stay in that pocket for 8 seconds and wait for a high quality throw. Find me the quarterback that's better at that than Aaron Rodgers. You can't. And you go back to 2022 now, as we talk about what Aaron Rodgers is, going off of that 2022 tape, the last time he played a full season, that guy's still there. Yes, his efficiency went down. His pass protection was horrible in the first half of the year. His wide receiver one was Allen Lazard until Garrett Wilson emerged in the last 2 months of the season when, by the way, Rodgers started playing at a much higher level in the second half of that year. That Packers team with a horrible defense and not a good surrounding cast after trading away Aaron Rodgers was still a Week 18 game away from going to the playoffs. That Packers team was nowhere near as talented as this Jets team. And the 2 years before 2022, he was an MVP, back-to-back. So to me, if I'm ranking who he is off of the 2022 tape, to me, that's the third or fourth best quarterback in the league still. If you can plug him into a real situation with adequate pass protection, an actual wide receiver to throw to, and not having to score 30 points a game, absolutely. But now we have to slap the Achilles injury on top of that. And that's where I just don't know how much that's going to slow him down further. And that's where even further regression is projected here. If last year, coming off of 2022, maybe regressing a little bit, but also reason to believe things can get better in a better situation. I had him as an elite graded quarterback, a 90 overall player. Now the Achilles. Does the arm and the athleticism dip down a little bit more and he's even less of his old self? I think that's very possible in how we have him rated here now as a tier 2 quarterback, not a tier 1 quarterback, and the 7th best overall quarterback in the league. The Achilles injury definitely throws a wrinkle in terms of what he really is. But I do feel pretty good about two things. Number one is Aaron Rodgers is tough as shit. This guy has played through partial ACL tears, broken thumbs, ankle sprains. I've seen it all. And his work ethic to recover from those injuries is sensational. So not only do I think Aaron is a guy that's going to put in the time and effort to recover from this injury, but also to take care of his body into his 40s to continue to play at a high level, but I also believe we're only just scratching the surface in terms of where we are with modern sports science. Seems like every year we become more and more wowed with how guys are playing well into their 30s and how players are able to respond from injuries like Achilles and ACLs that 15, 20 years ago felt like career enders. And man, you look at some of the clips and the way they're talking about Aaron at Jets camp right now, and he seems to be moving around and slinging the rock just fine. So I do think he can come back and play maybe not like his, elite prime self, but like a top 8 quarterback in the league. Ultimately, though, I do understand that is far from a given. I recognize the potential for this to go south. And if you're kind of leaning towards the side of doubting that this can happen, I get it, man. Not really even worth arguing about at this point. We're going to find out in about a week how he looks, and then over the course of the next couple of months, if he can stay healthy. But the other thing, too, as we kind of transition now towards the rest of the roster and this team, is the reality is he probably doesn't have to even play at this level. That might be a bit of a more optimistic projection for how he plays. If he drops down even another tier and plays something like a Kirk Cousins, for example, I still think that's good enough for the Jets to win a Super Bowl this year. So let's start to turn the page and see what the rest of this roster looks like and why I feel that way. Before we do that, I do want to mention the backup a little bit more here, Tyrod Taylor. I think we have addressed it a little bit, but really good signing. I mean, he stepped in a horrible situation with the other New York team last year with a horrible O-line, nobody to throw to, and he kind of kept the offense alive, made some really exciting, deep throws and play extension. He's a really tough, smart veteran type. He does have his overall limits, of course. The arm talent, the accuracy, the pocket presence, the overall processing and decision-making aren't at a NFL starter level from a week-to-week perspective. But if some of Aaron Rodgers' other durability questions pop up, this is a guy that has had a lot of seasons where he's dealing with something, whether it's a sprained ankle or a broken thumb or a broken rib, whatever it might be. If something like that were to pop up with Rodgers, you can lean on the side of caution with Tyrod Taylor. And just like we said, this is a team that can definitely support a Tyrod Taylor and still continue to win football games. I will reiterate, this team went 7-10 with Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and Tim Boyle at quarterback last year. So I think it was a really good move to go get Tyrod, and it does raise the floor a little bit, even if it doesn't necessarily raise the ceiling. I don't really think they have a Super Bowl ceiling with Tyrod Taylor. But now let's go to more of the position players here. And unfortunately, what does become a bit of a theme, at least on the offensive side of the ball, are the injury risks related to this Jets team. Not just Aaron Rodgers, but now as we look at the weapons, they have a major question mark player in Mike Williams. And in terms of ranking this group of weapons for the Jets, they come in with a C+ grade, which ranks 25th to 27th. But I want to make that very clear that is factoring in the health risk on a guy like Mike Williams. If you could guarantee me a full season of Mike Williams, this would jump up a tier into that B- tier, more of a top 20 group in a league crowded with good groups of weapons. But teams maybe like Baltimore or Green Bay, where we've said, this is a really good group that is more than enough to kind of get this team where they need to go. So I think if you have a healthy Mike Williams, that's where you are. If you don't, this is a group that does have some more question marks and, again, ranks a little closer to the bottom portion of the league. And we'll talk more about Mike Williams, but I do want to start with Garrett Wilson. And your questions about this wide receiving core have nothing to do with Garrett Wilson. And I really just mostly pick back up where we were in this video last year with Garrett Wilson, where I expect that leap to come from him. I think he's a transcendent talent, poised for that real breakout season to emerge as one of the true alpha wide receivers in the league, something close to a top 5 to 10 guy. Enter that tier of true alpha wide receivers, someone that can line up inside and out, threaten to all three levels of the defense, produce after the catch, and just be someone that you can truly make your first read consistently and funnel your offense through. I think Garrett Wilson has shown on tape that he is more than capable of being that guy. The problem is he just hasn't had the quarterback play to support him getting the production to justify putting him up into that group of wide receivers where there are just some really, really special talents in the NFL. But if Aaron stays healthy, do I expect Garrett Wilson to climb into that tier, be, let's just say it, a fantasy football superstar? One of the top 5 receivers in football from a production standpoint, being Aaron Rodgers' number 1 target, which has consistently led to guys being one of those top wide receivers, whether it was Devontae Adams or Jordy Nelson. And Garrett Wilson is even more talented than those guys. So I'm all in with a healthy Aaron Rodgers on Garrett Wilson taking that leap. And hell, even if it does become Tyrod Taylor here, I still think he could be poised for the best year of his career. And as long as they have Garrett Wilson, this is not going to be an incompetent group of weapons. But I do think if the Jets want this to be a group of weapons that can realistically support their Super Bowl aspirations, having Mike Williams mostly healthy this year is a pretty big part of that. Now, I do think people have just looked at Mike Williams and said, yeah, well, of course he's going to get hurt. He's basically not on the Jets. And okay, that's a little harsh here and a little detached from reality. Is this an injury-prone player? And has he shown to be an injury-prone player throughout his career? Yes, absolutely. But he has much more historically been one of these guys that deals with stuff throughout the course of the season and misses anywhere from 3 to 5 games on average. Last year, he did go down with the ACL tear, and that happened week 3. So you look at it and say, okay, he only played 167 snaps last year, right? But he had played at least 700 snaps. That's a good 12 games or so on average in 5 straight seasons. The only other sort of season-ending injury he's had was in his rookie season in 2017. And honestly, the fact that it was a week 3 injury last year bodes well for the Jets because he has had almost 12 months to recover from this ACL injury. He's fully healthy right now and should very much be good to go. So I'm accounting for the injury risk. I knocked them down a whole tier, but there is plenty of reason to believe that he can play a lot more than people think and be a bigger impact here than people think. And honestly, in terms of how he fits with this Jets team and with Aaron Rodgers, it is the perfect fit as that true big-bodied X-wide receiver. Stick him on the outside. You have Garrett Wilson to move around and run all of the routes you need, but Mike Williams can stick on the outside, run goes, slants, and comebackers here with Aaron Rodgers. And that's what I'm most excited about is Aaron Rodgers is maybe the best back shoulder comeback thrower ever. I know I've been just glazing up Aaron Rodgers, but really that's like his signature throw is having that sort of mind meld with these wide receivers with the timing and placement of these throws where he is so accurate to put that ball near the sideline at the exact moment when the wide receiver just needs to turn around, show a little body control. That ball is only where the wide receiver can get it. And in the case of Mike Williams, that catch radius is expanded. This is a player with excellent physicality to box out defenders for those types of catches, but also just the ball tracking the hands and the body control to have those toe tapping catches on the sideline. And I feel like Mike was a little slow to develop that with Justin Herbert, but we were really starting to see that come along just as things kind of fell off there with the ACL last year. So I really think he's the perfect fit in this offense. And I think if you're the Jets, you're hoping he can play enough in the regular season that he can prove and establish that he works with Aaron Rodgers, that they have that timing and that chemistry down. And if he's going to miss 6 games, that's a hurdle. You have to overcome that. You still have to find ways to win in those games. But this is much more about making sure Mike Williams is healthy come playoff time, because that is ultimately all that matters. And if you can get him healthy for 3 or 4 games in the playoffs, that could be a game changer for the Jets. And I think that's a lot more realistic of a projection for Mike Williams than I think people realize. So really like this signing. And it was a good move for Mike too. He's 30 years old. He goes somewhere that he knows is a perfect fit. 1 year, $15 million contract. He's going to set himself up to hit free agency again or get a big deal here with the Jets. Kind of betting on himself. And man, I know we account for the injury risk, but I am leaning towards a positive outcome here from him. But beyond Mike Williams, and in those games where he is likely to miss time, or if he is massively regressed from the ACL or gets injured for the season again, you do open up a lot of questions. Now, Rodgers is not unfamiliar with having a true alpha and then basically nobody else other than a good receiving back. He had that for effectively 3 years when it was Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, and like Allen Lazard and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He won multiple MVPs with that. So it's not that Rodgers can't make that happen, but even within those MVP seasons, you saw some frustrating performances, and you just ideally would make things a little easier on Aaron, especially as he's getting up in age and potentially regressing a little bit, as we talked about. So after Mike, it does seem that Xavier Gipson is going to emerge as their next leading snap getter, if you will, but I do definitely think this is going to be a big rotation for wide receiver 3. And of course, you expect there will be weeks where, Lazard or Corley are stepping in as a starter if Mike Williams isn't available. But Gibson's an explosive, kind of undersized, diamond in the rough type. He came from Stephen F. Austin. We really don't know too much about him. And we really don't know too much about him because he made the team undrafted last year. And unless you were diving into Stephen F. Austin tape, which I didn't have Xavier Gipson on my radar coming into the draft, forgive me. But obviously, everything that existed in the structure of this Jets offense last year, you basically throw out. It was a disaster from the O-line to the quarterback to the receivers to the play calling. Obviously, you're expecting this to be a situation that's much more conducive to his success, but definitely fits the mold of that sort of juiced up 5'9", speedy slot. Call him, I don't know if you fully go gadget. Like, I don't know that he's shown great run after catch ability or anything like that. But I do think projecting him as the slot receiver option here makes a lot of sense, right? You have your do-it-all Garrett Wilson, who can move inside and out but can play outside. Mike Williams, your ex. Gibson's projecting in a lot of their 11 personnel to be that sort of slot wide receiver. And in an ideal situation, he can emerge as kind of Rodgers' Randall Cobb in that role. And he got to play behind Randall Cobb last year, and an amazing mentor to have for that position. And I think it's more than reasonable to kind of put the up arrow on him, given that he's so unproven, hasn't really even established himself as a starting caliber player. But like I don't expect him to be a superstar or anything, but can he be a useful slot player in a role that fits him with Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback? I do think so. So they're relatively excited about him, and sort of the diamond in the rough potential is always exciting when a guy did test really well, comes from a small level of competition, and kind of looks the part at the next level. There's a real chance for him to emerge as a piece, but only time will tell there. We can't rank him out too high because he just hasn't really shown much in the NFL. But I do expect he's not going to be the full-on number 3 wide receiver. I think depending on kind of what they want and what they're looking for, there will be a bit of a rotation there. You do still have Allen Lazard on this roster. And look, man, when they gave him 4 years, $44 million, I threw up a little bit. I've been trying to say for years, Allen Lazard without Aaron Rodgers is a player that comes into the league undrafted, can't make a bad Jacksonville Jaguars receiving core, and then on a Jets team that needed somebody to step up, ends up getting benched and is kicking soccer balls around during practice. He is not a talented player. He's oversized. He's 6'5", 225 pounds. Does not create separation. He's a poor route runner. He cannot release from press at the line of scrimmage because he has no foot speed, no acceleration, no technique. And there's not even a point in him being 6'5", 220 pounds because he's incredibly soft at the catch point and has poor ball skills. He has frustrating drops left and right. And his contested catch win rate is down there with what you would expect from someone like a Xavier Gipson. Now, for whatever reason, him and Aaron Rodgers do have some bit of a chemistry together. And Rodgers does trust him to be the guy that's going to consistently get that check, get that hand signal, be on the same page with him. He seems to like him off the field as well. And if that resumes, Lazard presumably will play. He will presumably get targets here. And as a result of playing with Aaron Rodgers as opposed to Zach Wilson, he should return to at least being a very, very low baseline starting caliber wide receiver when he's on the field again with Aaron Rodgers. Now, I also think that even Aaron Rodgers might just be done with Lazard. Now getting to see talented players like Mike Williams come into the building, developing more of a chemistry with Garrett Wilson, Xavier Gipson, and seeing Allen Lazard just quit on this team last year, I'd like to think that Aaron is going to kind of put Allen Lazard in a box somewhere and tuck him away. And that the moment this team gets an opportunity to move on from this contract, they will. But there is just no guarantee that that's going to happen. And if he's playing football, you might get some decent moments, but you are going to have just as many, if not more. But you are going to have just as many moments, if not more, where you're pulling your hair out because he drops a slant on 3rd and 6 that ends up a critical play in the game. And I'm also scared that in those games that Mike Williams gets hurt, they're going to just put Allen Lazard in that role because he's also tall and think he can do that stuff. Allen Lazard is a putrid outside wide receiver. He cannot do the stuff that Mike Williams does in terms of body control and ball skills and winning go balls. If Allen Lazard is good at anything, it is as that big slot wide receiver. His slot fades are like pretty nice. I would say if there's one good thing he does, it's running a slot fade from the slot, obviously. And the other useful thing he does have for this team, as they currently only roster 2 tight ends, is he does block. And I do think he'll have a role as that like quasi tight end, kind of the Cooper Kupp role that we talked about with the Rams deep dive, Juwan Jennings for the Niners, where he's an oversized wide receiver that can kind of, crack down if you want to run toss and seal off that. Like he can crack down on a defensive end or a linebacker. Like he has the size to do that. So there are some things he can do for this team. And in an incredibly tiny role in this offense, if you just focus on the couple things that he does actually do well, maybe you can get a little something out of that contract from Lazard. But honestly, if he just doesn't play and Aaron Rodgers just kind of forgets he exists because he's got much more talented players here, that's fine by me too. And then you have Malachi Corley, who I think is a really fun pick here. The thing is, like, Rodgers just does not like rookie wide receivers. We've talked a lot about his sort of like very nuanced, specific ways he wants to run an offense is predicated on understanding his signals, understanding what to look for in the defense and what his signals mean, when he's changing a route or checking you into a bubble screen. And in that 2022 season with the Packers, when he was surrounded by rookie wide receivers, he clearly had enough of it. Like guys doing the wrong thing, setting the team up for failure. And it's going to take a long time for Corley to really get targets and earn Aaron's trust. I do think the Jets would be smart, though, and Aaron should be perfectly willing to at least use him in a bit of a gadget role because he was a legit weapon as that sort of running back who's playing wide receiver. He drew a lot of Deebo Samuel comps. He's not as explosive. He's not as big as Deebo. He's probably never going to be as good as Deebo. But in terms of like his play style and how you should use him, yes, absolutely. He is tough as nails after the catch, really good contact balance, really good elusiveness in space. And he did some stuff running slants, running digs, where he showed the ability to separate at the top of his route. So he's a talented player. And I think even in a small role, he could make an impact and make some plays for this team. But I also wouldn't rule out him kind of emerging as the season goes on. It's not going to happen in the first 10 weeks of the season, really. But one thing that we've seen with Rodgers is once he comes to respect your work ethic and your knowledge of the game, that can develop really quickly. We saw that even with Allen Lazard when he stepped in to Green Bay. We saw it with Christian Watson within that rookie season. And if he can get that to catch, he's going to be in business. I think he was a really talented player who had honestly became a value when the Jets, I think, came up in the draft to get him to make sure they can get that weapon after they went offensive tackle in the first round. And ultimately, I think he can become a little bit of a sort of wild card factor for this Jets team to give them a little bit more juice in this group of weapons. So it's not a guarantee, but definitely something to keep an eye out for. And then you got a couple of kind of undrafted types as well making this team, Jason Browley and Charles Irvin. Those are your wide receivers. Then you get to the tight ends, 2 of them. Tyler Conklin he's good for what he is, and he actually has the best contested catch win rate among tight ends over the last 2 years. He's been second in contested catch win rate for tight ends back-to-back years. Now that's all he's going to do is box dudes out. He's incredibly rocked up. Like corners can be, and linebackers even can be draped all over him, and he can just box you out, win that with strong hands, doesn't drop the ball. That's a trait he has that's useful for this Jets team. Beyond that, though, not really getting much. He's not an athlete. He's not a route runner or a separator. And he's not even as good of a blocker as you would hope he would be for what he is. He's fine at it. But I do think with Aaron Rodgers, who's not going to be as mobile as he was in his peak, when he will get into scramble drill, but he might not be able to outrun that defensive end or the guy collapsing down, the slot corner chasing him from his zone. But if he gets into a pinch, he can put the ball where only Tyler Conklin can get it. Or even if one of these guards loses quickly, if they get blitzed and they don't have a good answer, I do think he's a guy that Rodgers can just give him a chance. And Tyler Conklin, 69% contested catch win rate in back-to-back years. That takes the term 50-50 ball and turns it up. So that's a nice thing they have that could be an asset for them to move the chains. But that is like the only thing he does well, right? Then you have Jeremy Rucker. Was a fine enough mid-round draft pick last year, kind of that balanced possession tight end. He theoretically brings a little bit more upside in terms of, I can't say explosiveness. He's not an explosive player, but he can run up the seam and run some more routes than a guy like Tyler Conklin. Probably won't play a lot, but he's a fine enough backup to have. And, no reason he couldn't emerge as a starter someday, but he is behind Conklin for now. And then again, as of this recording, only 2 tight ends on the roster, but they will almost certainly be adding somebody here. Probably not any difference makers. And then Breece Hall, man, we kind of alluded to it, but this does remind me a lot of when Aaron Jones was like the second best receiver in those Packers offenses. That's not the case if Mike Williams is available for them, but when he's unavailable, he might be. I don't know that Breece has established to be the true route runner that someone like Aaron Jones is, where he can actually step outside and run routes and separate and make like really tough catches down the field. I'm not saying he can't do those things, but he certainly hasn't proven to be that yet. But in terms of running routes out of the backfield and showing consistent hands and being an elite run after catch threat on dump downs or any sort of route out of the backfield, I mean, he was second in the NFL in receiving yards among running backs behind Christian McCaffrey last year. So he is a legit weapon, and you could probably do worse than, okay, Aaron Rodgers is reading Garrett Wilson. If he's open, throw it. If he's not, either get into scramble drill or check it down to Breece and let him do his work. Honestly, it's not ideal, but you could do a lot worse than that as a game plan too. And they'll get some explosive plays from him in the design screen game. So he's just a running back, but he does play into the picture here as well. Beyond Breece for the running backs, it's a bunch of young dudes that haven't really established much. Theoretically, one of these guys should get some snaps on passing downs, but kind of hard to tell you exactly who that's going to be. And we're about to talk about these guys more in depth in our next segment here. But it is to me still a pretty good group of weapons, just with the health concerns. All the pieces do make sense to me. You've got a little bit of everything. It's just you do become stretched much more thin if and when Mike Williams goes down. But there's upside here to like ride the high end of variance too. And if Mike stays healthy, Wilson and Gibson take leaps forward, Malachi Corley emerges at the end of the year, this could actually be like a top half of the league group of weapons and a legit really good room. And I really do think, where we've got them ranked, 25th to 27th, is about as close to their floor as you will see given the injury risk on Mike Williams. But obviously that upside could be much, much higher. But let's move forward with the running backs. And one more thing that's really nice here, and we still got to talk about the offensive line, of course, but this should be a pretty good run game, too, to support this offense. This is a really nice backfield. They come in that tier ranked 6th to 12th. All these running back groups that are kind of knocking on the door of being a top 5 group. And that definitely fits the Jets' description. Like Breece Hall, I don't think has emerged as that guy quite yet, especially from a production standpoint. But I don't think even I don't know how many Breece Hall haters there are out there, but even the guy who's the lowest on Breece Hall would probably admit his tape is really damn good and there's no reason he can't be a top 5 back. And he's the complete package, man. He's got the size, he's got the athleticism, love his agility and foot speed, but he's got excellent vision, always did coming out of Iowa State. We already talked about how he's an impact in the receiving game. Literally, what's not to like about Breece Hall? And he's produced despite poor offensive line play, and especially, I don't have the stats on me, unfortunately, but I would bet a large sum of money that he was at least in the top 3 in terms of percentage of his runs that were into a loaded box with 8 guys in the line of scrimmage. Just watching the Jets back, that had to be true because nobody respected this passing game. So you look forward to 2024 now, and even if Brees is what he's been, that's a great running back that's going to elevate the run game and help out the passing game and Aaron Rodgers. But there's like 3 reasons to believe that the arrow should be pointing up on him between less players in the box, now a year fully recovered from his ACL injury, and a better offensive line, as we'll see in a minute here. And, you know, I think he's already right on the cusp of like top 5 to 7 running backs in the NFL right now, but there is like this arms race right now for like who's going to be the second best running back in the league this year behind Christian McCaffrey. Is it going to be Bijan in Atlanta, Derrick Henry in Baltimore taking that back, you know, Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis? I think Brees Hall is right in that conversation for you know, can be that good, basically. Now, the Jets team ranking is a little bit lower than those 3 backs we just mentioned. Specifically, those guys are either more proven or have a more complete running back room than the Jets do here, where your backups here are all very unproven talents. So that's the difference in the team ranking there. But Brees Hall himself, I think, very much has the talent to get into that mix. And, like, he's going in the first round of fantasy drafts for a reason. Like, he's in a really good position to be, you know, a monster this year, have like an all-pro type of season, if you will. And that gets pretty damn exciting when everything we've previewed so far is already looking pretty good for this offense. Now, the backup room is entirely unproven, but I'm kind of excited for it. And I actually do like these guys. It's just they haven't played, and they're super young day 3 draft picks, so I can't come out and rank them that high. But honestly, I like how both Braylon Allen and Izzy Abanikanda fit as backups here. Both guys super, super young, by the way. Braylon Allen is 20 years old, doesn't turn 21 until January when the Jets are hopefully still playing. And Abanikanda in year 2 doesn't turn 22 until November. So these guys are still very much coming into their own. But I do think, you know, again, they're both very different. They both have complementary skill sets. I think Braylon Allen has the clearest path to be kind of the guy that plays more and is more of a complement to Brees Hall. He's a big back. Like this theoretically could be your sort of I can't say lightning and thunder because Brees Hall himself is lightning and thunder. But having that thunder to come in to convert short yardage situations. And also, I like Braylon Allen as a guy that can come in and kind of grind out the fourth quarter so you don't have to over-rely on Brees Hall giving him 300 carries. I at least like Braylon Allen in that sort of role, something like a Gus Edwards, if you will. But I do think Braylon Allen's got a little bit more to him than that. He's got really light feet for such a big guy. You know, he drew a lot of like A.J. Dillon comps. I didn't really go there because Dillon carries so much of his weight in his lower half that it's like he's stuck in mud. He can't pick up his feet. He can't really accelerate or change lanes or make you miss at all. You know, Allen is a power style back, but he does do that with lighter feet. So he can kind of, you know, sidestep you a little bit at the tackle point. Actually change directions and you know, change lanes. If something gets clogged up, he can bounce it into a different gap. But he does have this super powerful torso that he'll use it to, you know, put a stiff arm on and truck India. I like him. I don't know that he's ever going to be a feature back in the league. He's not the next Derrick Henry or anything like that, but I do think he's going to prove to be a very capable backup for what he is in this role. And then Izzy Abanikanda, he is just an athlete, man. He has excellent speed. I believe my pro comp on him was Raheem Mostert. And if they want to have someone else that can run wide zone, kind of be that speed threat to the corner and be a bit of a home run hitter that maybe gets 2 to 4 carries a game and you're hoping to catch lightning in a bottle, and if you get a well-blocked run, Abanikanda has like 40, 50-yard breakaway run potential. So you really do kind of have it all. And then Isaiah Davis, they did draft him right after Braylon Allen. He is more of just the solid, tough dude, the smart back. I wanted to like him more at South Dakota State. He had ridiculous production, but I think it was much more of the product of elite run blocking at that level of competition behind some NFL offensive linemen. I didn't see a lot of rushing creativity and a lot of athletic juice, so I'm a little lower on him, but it is an exciting young backup room and really just an exciting young running back room in general. There's no reason this can't be one of the best running back tandems in all of football as early as this season. So that's just yet another asset for this Jets team and a part of why I just think the world of this entire roster. From a QB run multiplier perspective, you're not getting anything there. Not a surprise with Aaron Rodgers. Even if he was a rushing threat, you probably wouldn't give him design rushes because the durability and health risk. So nothing there. But let's talk about the offensive line. And we do see a continuation of the health questions here. They are dinged a little bit for durability question marks here. Again, I just want to point out that is factored in. They come in as my 9th overall offensive line, 8th to 15th in pass blocking, 11th in run blocking. They would be a little bit higher than that if you could guarantee me that Tyron Smith and Elijah Vera Tucker stay healthy. But even with some of those risks, this offensive line looks really nice. And they do have some insurance policies this year if one of those guys does get hurt. But let's start with Tyron Smith. He comes in as the left tackle here, and prying him away from the Cowboys, who I do think wanted him back, was one of my favorite moves of this offseason, maybe behind going to get Morgan Moses for a 4th-round pick. Just love overall what they did with this tackle group. But he can still play, man. It's just over the last 4 years, he's basically rotated years of availability. He was taken off the field for pretty much all of the 2020 season. 2021, he had a fantastic year. 2022 was kind of just on and off the field throughout the season, and even when he played was clearly hurt, was not his old self. Entered last year, which was his age 33 season last year, with obvious durability and just how good is he concerns, basically. And he had a monster season. I can't say he had a career year because this is a Hall of Fame caliber player, but he did have the best year he's had as a pass protector since 2018. The main difference is I don't think he's quite the elite athlete, elite run blocker that he still was, but still definitely good enough to get the job done in that regard. But man, he played almost 1,000 snaps last year. He's currently healthy. I look at the fact that he's just this super freak athlete. The Cowboys, I think, wanted him back. And I look around the league and see offensive linemen kind of bouncing back and playing great into their mid to late 30s, like a Trent Williams. You have to be kind of a super freak to be able to do that, but I think Tyron Smith is. So I do factor in the durability question marks here, but I think this is much more of a kind of Teron Armstead situation where you figure he's a guy that can get banged up and can miss a few games here and there, might miss a stretch, might miss 2 or 3 weeks here and there. And you have to kind of plan and work around that, which, as we'll see, the Jets have done that. But if they can get him in the playoffs, that is huge. And like I said, they did plan for him to miss some time in drafting Olu Fashanu in the first round. And I want to actually talk about him because I fully expect that Olu's going to play 4 to 6 games this year at left tackle. And for them to basically feel like they have probably the best backup left tackle in the NFL, given that Tyron Smith is their guy there, has to feel really good. And even if drafting a Brock Bowers would have raised the theoretical upside of this team, in some world where Tyron Smith did stay healthy, if you put a Brock Bowers was the other guy that maybe we're considering in the draft, you put him on this offense, things could get insane. But given how things went last year and how good this defense is, you're just hoping for a solid offense here. And I think having this floor raised at left tackle is a huge deal for this team. And Olu was the right guy for that too, because he's got upside, he's got franchise left tackle potential. In a normal draft class, he would have been a lock, top 6 to 10 draft pick in my opinion, but this draft class was just loaded, so they were lucky to get him at 11. But he was the guy because his floor as a pass blocker was just so high. He's so technically sound. He's got a great anchor. He's great with his hands. The pro comp on him was Laramie Tunsil. And that was because he was so like he's similar size, but similar in the sense that he's a great pass protector. Doesn't quite do as much as a run blocker, though. For whatever reason, the foot speed and range that he shows as a pass protector just doesn't really show up in his get-off moving forward as a run blocker. And that, again, that's been Laramie Tunsil's thing his whole career. So I fully anticipate Olu's going to play, Tyron's going to miss some time. But to be able to fall on a top 10 draft pick, basically, that would presumably be starting for any other team that would have spent a top 10 draft pick on him, and you would be super excited about him starting for that team, like that's outstanding. And I also think Olu could play a little guard as an insurance policy there too. If Vera Tucker gets hurt or if John Simpson isn't what they hoped they were signing. I don't think that's ideal. I think the best case scenario is you just keep him as a mentee behind Tyron Smith, ready to go at that left tackle spot specifically. I think it's good for a rookie's development. Keep him in one spot, let him focus on it. But if you do need to get into a little bit more of an emergency situation, I think he could handle it, at least as a pass protector. He's not like oversized or anything, and I think his frame actually fills in well as a guard. Not necessarily from a run blocking perspective, but I think he could hang, if need be, as just sort of a sixth man of the year type on this offensive line. So it's a really good starting point at left tackle. You know, there's a lot of great left tackles in the NFL today, but I think half the teams in the league would happily trade places with the Jets just in terms of their left tackle situation. And then at left guard, you have John Simpson. I think they're hoping he's going to be their weak link with some development from Joe Tippmann. And that's kind of the contract they gave him, a 2-year, $9 million deal to come in, get the starting job, and just be solid. And watching the Ravens very recently for our last deep dive, I was pretty impressed by John Simpson. His anchor and pass protection is phenomenal. Like, he will take his losses. He'll lose to quickness. He'll miss with his hands. He's not a perfect pass protector, and he will have those losses where Aaron's going to get quick pressure and he's going to have to do something about it. But it's not to a degree that you're worried about. But on a down-to-down basis, like, he's going to give Rodgers that clean pocket to step up into. He is not going backwards. And he's a pretty nice run blocker, too. He's a decent athlete for a guy his size, and he's got that desire to be a good blocker. So I like John Simpson. I think it was a good signing. And then again, they're kind of hoping he's going to be the weak link with some growth here in year 2 from Joe Tippmann, who I think was fine as a rookie center playing on a garbage offensive line. I mean, for what it's worth, I thought they should have taken John Michael Schmitz, and John Michael Schmitz was surrounded by equally trash with the Giants and had a horrible year. I don't think Tippmann had a horrible year. He definitely had his questions as a pass blocker when teams were able to isolate him one-on-one, and that was a big question with him coming out, was how was he going to be as a one-on-one pass protector? But as we know, you can very easily shelter your center via double teams in pass protection if that's your weakest link. But I also think he's got the traits. He's got an anchor and the foot speed and the length to develop as a pass protector as well. And as a run blocker, kind of as you expected, he was very solid as a rookie coming out of Wisconsin. He's a good athlete. Should really only continue to get better there. So there is plenty of reason to believe that with in year 2 specifically, but with a better surrounding team around him as well, that Tippmann can take a step up and basically emerge as their 4th best player, let John Simpson be the weak link. But even if he's kind of close to what he was last year, it's not necessarily ideal, but you could still do worse than that, I think. And then at right guard, this is probably your next biggest question mark is can Elijah Vera Tucker stay healthy? Former high first-round draft pick. They took the 23rd pick that turned into Christian Darrisaw, and moved up to take Vera Tucker, a guard, at 12 or whatever it was. Definitely wasn't my favorite move on draft day, and it has not really paid off for the Jets overall. He's still been a good player, which is what you expect when you take a guard in the top half of the draft. He's a nasty run blocker. He's got a ton of play strength. He's another guy that's not really going to go backwards in pass protection, but he does lose more than you would think for a guy that has played tackle, theoretically has good technique. He does lose more as a pass blocker than you would think. Not that he's horrible in that regard or that you're worried about it, but even when he is healthy, he's a good guard. He's not a phenomenal guard or anything like that. And again, he's just missed so much time. He's only played 670 snaps over the last 2 years. Now, his rookie year, he was fully healthy, and he wasn't like an injury-prone player coming out or anything, right? So, coming off an ACL injury, there's reason to believe he can bounce back and get and stay healthy here, but he does have to prove that he can do that. But then at right tackle, you have Morgan Moses. I love this trade. I think from a value perspective, this was maybe the highest like stealing value move that any team made this offseason. I can't for the life of me understand why the Ravens were willing to do that. I mean, I said it the second the Ravens signed him from the Jets. You can go back and check the record. I was like, he just became like the most underappreciated, like best value contract in the league. They had him on, 3 years, $15 million? And they had another year of that when this is a guy that has strangely only gotten better with age. He looks more athletic with age to me. The way that the Ravens started to weaponize him as a puller, and like he is one of the best pulling blockers, but certainly pulling tackles, because you don't see that very often. But when he gets on the move, he has nasty play strength, a great targeting system. He's got an awesome anchor and pass protection. At his age, he's got good technique. He's kind of seen it all. He's not the most sensational athlete, but I think he's a top 5 to 10 right tackle in the league. To round out, again, what looks like a pretty good group here, man. When you talk about the depth, we already talked about Olu Fashanu. I love having him as an option. I think we could see him at guard if Vera Tucker or Simpson went down. And then they do have a veteran in Wes Schweitzer. He's like adequate O-line NFL depth. There's not a lot of guys going around, right? Like not even all, 5 starters for all 32 teams are filled out with capable players. So Wes Schweitzer is not ideal if he steps in, but he has played a lot. He's got 3 position flexibility on the inside. I would just say you could do worse in terms of O-line depth than Wes Schweitzer. And then you're into like developmental territory. Max Mitchell was a 4th round pick I liked, but he has struggled. I think the play strength aspect for him has been a roadblock. Carter Warren was a day 3 pick last year. He was a good pass protector at Pittsburgh. We'll see what year 2 looks like for him. And then Xavier Newman did play a little bit last year when they were shuffling the deck at center. And, he's an undersized athlete, showed that off as a run blocker a little bit, but you would definitely want to help him out in pass protection. So they can stomach maybe an injury and a half, but it can't be like last year where these guys are dropping like flies and they're moving people all over the place. Overall, though, I think this is one of the most improved groups in the entire league, and that is maybe even getting slept on with this Jets team. Like, everyone's complaining that I have the Jets ranked over the Ravens, and it's like 2/5 of their offensive line from last year are now on the Jets. Obviously not the only thing that matters there, but it's a pretty significant thing. So as we wrap up the offense overall, they come in 14th in run game, 14th in passing game, a situation where the math actually adds up. They come out as my 14th overall offense. And if that's what you get with the defense that we're about to preview, this Jets team is super, super dangerous. Now, obviously, there is like a floor that we saw last year where these guys suffer a bunch of season-ending injuries and the floor gets completely wiped out. But we did factor in the injury risk with the quarterback, with the weapons, with the pass blocking. You can't say that's their complete floor because this is a unique team when it comes to injury. We're trying to account for that the best we can here. But even reducing all of these position groups, given the injury stuff, this group still comes out as like the 14th best offense. It's a very complete roster. They are much more equipped to handle injuries than they were in years past. Good backup quarterback, insurance policies on the offensive line. But that's all floor discussion. I mean, there is a world where they do actually, for the first time in franchise history, ride the positive side of injury luck. And if that happens, The weapons will be much better. The offensive line will be even better than we're projecting, or at least how we have them ranked. And maybe even Aaron Rodgers will be better than the 7th ranked quarterback that we have him at right now. If you get that, plus kind of Rodgers' impact on the offensive coaching, probably never going to be like top 20 for offensive coaching, but instead of being, tied for last in every degree, can they be 22nd in terms of how the play calling and the offense is operating here? If all that happens, this could very clearly be like a top 6 offense in the league, and they don't need that to happen. They will happily take 14th with how good this defense is. But if you're playing the probability game, that opens your margin for error for things to go a little bit south on the defense if things do go well with the offense. If they take a step back defensively, but a giant leap forward with the offense, that's still a path for them to be a Super Bowl team. It really is. But let's switch over and talk about that defense. Starting with the defensive line, it's a fantastic group. It's a very similar group to last year stylistically, but definitely some moving pieces here to discuss. So they come in as my 4th to 6th ranked overall offensive line, 4th to 8th in pass rush, and above average for D-line run defense, 5th to 14th. Now, full disclosure here, they actually were a tier higher for that pass rush ranking, but I dinged them down a little bit as I did my research, watched a little Hassan Reddick. I came in a little bit lower on Reddick than I was maybe in May when I put these rankings together. And that's going to have an impact on the overall defensive ranking, which I'll point out again later on. But I'll come back to Reddick. I want to start with Quinnen Williams because he is the center point, literally, and metaphorically for this D-line. Everything revolves around him. I think you could argue he's the one guy that they actually asked to just be a traditional player at his position because the way that they use these guys is very unique. They're all rotating all over the place. They run stunts. They have these guys going left and right. But Quinnen, for the most part, it's like you're our 3-tech. At times, you got to be our nose tackle. You are the guy that has to play with traditional discipline, traditional technique, be a consistent run stopper. To actually hold your ground, occasionally take on double teams, get off blocks. And man, he took a huge step in that regard last year. They took a kind of a leap of faith with the massive contract they gave him. He probably hadn't played to the level that they paid him at, but they felt like he could take that next step as a run defender, probably because he did it so well at Alabama. They felt good about him doing that, and he absolutely did. He was tied for 3rd in the NFL among interior defensive linemen for run stops. And for whatever you think of PFF grades, he was 1st in the NFL in run defense grade for interior defensive linemen. I mean, even if you think lowly of PFF run defense grades, if you're 1st, you're doing something right. And by the way, the film just tells you that story too. He took a huge leap there to be a true 3-down superstar defensive tackle. And part of that leap was taking another jump as a pass rusher. He was 5th in pressures for defensive tackles last year, jumping from 52 the year before to 70 last year. Like, he has entered that true number 1 territory, and he's the guy now that teams go into the game saying, where's 95? We got to make sure we got 2 bodies on him, and then Robert Saleh can craft stunts and blitzes off the fact that he knows he's drawing the double team and he's getting slides his direction. So not only the pressures he himself will get you and the sacks he himself will get you matter, but the force multiplying effect he has is a huge, huge deal here. So fun. Such a complete player. The power, the quickness, the finesse, the run defense, the size, the athleticism checks every single box. You could even argue the arrow could be pointing up on him. I don't want to just put the up arrow on every single player. He broke out as a superstar defensive tackle. I don't know that he's necessarily going to become Chris Jones or prime Fletcher Cox and get quite to that level of player, but it certainly is possible. So he's phenomenal. He is just the center point for how this D-line is constructed and for why they rank out so high for the defensive line. But they have a lot of other pieces to discuss here. That is where I do want to bounce back out to the edge and talk about Hassan Reddick. And there's a lot to discuss on him. I mean, they trade for him. They flip Bryce Huff for him, essentially. And they looked at Reddick as a potentially more explosive replacement for Huff as that kind of undersized pass rush specialist, if you will. But Reddick is better as a run defender than Bryce Huff. Not that he can truly set a hard edge and be a dominant run defender, but he is instinctive in that phase, a former linebacker. He's got good stack shed, peak technique, and has foot speed and instincts to kind of make plays as a run defender. So, I think they feel like he's at his best. He's a more explosive pass rusher than Bryce Huff, and a little bit more practical on early downs, even if he is up there in age. So I don't mind the flip there. I do think he makes a lot of sense, especially for a team that, we're going to talk a lot about stunts and games here. And with Hassan Reddick, to have his speed, his bend, and his just kind of flexibility. I mean, even I'm guilty of kind of giving him crap for he gets a lot of sacks, but over the course of his career, it hasn't always backed up the number of pressures and his win rate and all that stuff. Kind of implying that he gets lucky. And I think there's some of that, but also his change of direction and his ability to stay balanced as he's trying to wrap up tackles. He is really good when he does win at converting sacks. So in a system where they're going to get him into the backfield, right? They're going to stunt him up. They're going to let him scream off the edge. They're going to have Quinnen Williams or Javon Kinlaw or whoever's lining up as that 3 or 4 tech. They're gonna blow shit up, and then he's gonna have warp lanes to get through towards the quarterback. He makes a ton of sense in that way, and because of the scheme fit, I think he could actually be poised for something like a career year here in this system, as opposed to Philadelphia, where it was much more of hey, just go line up, go win. They're gonna help him produce in this system. So there's reason to believe he could get better, but there's 2 things to discuss in terms of negativity or why you might not get that from him. The first of which is the contract dispute. He is kind of holding in right now, and his availability for week 1 is up in the air. They traded for him in his age 30 season on the last year of his contract, and Reddick does have some leverage to say, hey, you traded for me, you should extend me. But the Jets also have the leverage to say, yeah, but, and we're about to talk about this in a minute too, you kind of had a down year last year. You showed some regression. We're bringing you in here to have a great opportunity to produce and then get paid big money. And it's not like you're getting nothing on your current contract. So there's a dispute going on there. I do think he suits up. I think they'll work it out, whether it's a revised current contract where he gets a little bit money to come back, or they do reach maybe a 2-year, $40 million extension, something maybe close to what Danielle Hunter got with Houston. So I'm not terribly worried about it, but it does add some volatility to where we are at this point in time on this discussion. He might not be out there, or something might happen there. I'm not too worried about it. I think they'll get it worked out, but it's on the radar. But the bigger concern is I just don't think he was all that good last year. He had a really slow start dealing with an injury, got healthy, started to play well again, and then I don't know if the injury flared back up or what really happened, but man, his tape from the last 4 weeks of the season was horrible. He was a complete non-factor, just 2 pressures and no sacks in the final 3 games of the season. And at that point in time, I mean, you remember Arizona lit him up, Tampa lit him up in that playoff game, and getting nothing from Reddick definitely didn't help that defense figure things out. And it did kind of bring me back to the old Hassan Reddick, where he just wasn't really winning one-on-one reps, where he doesn't really have the full tool belt to have a pass rush plan and all that stuff. He doesn't have a lot of power to truly win one-on-ones. He's a guy that really wins off of his speed, bend, and pursuit. And in his absolute peak in 2022, he did show off some power as well. But there is a concern there. Okay, he is 30 years old and is a guy that primarily wins off of his athleticism. If he's lost even a half a step, that can be all the difference in the world in him being a good pass rusher versus a great pass rusher, which he was in 2022. So, when I put these ratings together in May, I had him as more of a superstar tier blue-coated player for the purposes of this series. I did ding him down after kind of researching him a little bit more. But because he was dealing with some injuries last year, and given that this scheme fit is such a perfect fit for him, I don't think it's all bad either. There is a world where this is a really good fit, and he can kind of get back to that top 10 production that he had in 2022. So he is in many ways a wild card for this team. Does he show up, and what kind of player do they get? But as we go to talk about the rest of this defensive line and what we've already said about Quinnen Williams, there's still a very nice floor here. I think if they don't get a snap from Hassan Reddick, this will still be something like a top 10 pass rush because of the other players they have and the scheme doing a lot of the work there. I don't think that'll be the case. I think he plays, and that's how they come in about top 5. But if Reddick can be what he was in 2022, which I don't think is like unreasonable to hope for at all, you are talking about more of a like elite top 3 pass rush. So he does bring a bit of a spectrum here. But a big reason they don't need to depend on Hassan Reddick is they have Jermaine Johnson and they have Will McDonald, who we'll talk about. But Jermaine Johnson established himself last year as like a good 2. Man, like he's got speed to power, a ton of effort, just that sort of straight line, linear power athlete. And then he does some really good stuff with swipes and technique with his hands to operate as a counter. He's got inside-outside counters with those swipes. And he doesn't have bend. That's, I think, what is ultimately going to maybe keep him out from being like an elite tier pass rusher. I still think he can continue to get better than what he is now. But while he doesn't have bend, he does have light feet and can kind of change lanes and work you inside and out while primarily having that threat of power. And man, he is the perfect player for this system because his get off, his explosiveness, and his willingness to just detonate a tackle and a guard. We talk a lot about, having that 3-tech, that defensive tackle being a guy that can do that, be that disruptor that occupies the guard and the tackle so that your fast, bendy edge rusher can warp inside. That's a TE stunt, a tackle end stunt, but there's ET stunts that they run too, where they'll actually have the end come in and blow up the tackle, crash him into the guard, and then have an athletic defensive tackle loop around the outside and in. And that'll come into play when we talk about some of these athletes they put on the interior, and Quinnen Williams can do that stuff too. But Jermaine Johnson is perfect at just basically throwing C4 at the problem. And even if there's no technique involved, that just raw effort and explosiveness and power is a huge asset for this team. So he's a great fit and is a real impact for this D-line. But then you have Will McDonald. And, I mean, he's kind of their leverage on Hassan Reddick because it's like, okay, Reddick, we want you here. We traded for you. You're a perfect fit for this system. You can have a great year and then get paid at 30 years old. But if you don't play, like, we can still make this work. We have a near identical skill set, even if unproven, in Will McDonald. All of the speed, the bend, the undersizedness of it all, that's all there in Will McDonald. Their first-round pick last year. And when they picked him, it was one of my least favorite picks in the first round because I didn't think the opportunity was there, and it did feel early. I had him more as a late first, early second type of guy because he was a bit of a weird prospect. Really undersized, 6'3", 235 pounds, and was a 24-year-old prospect out of the Big 12 who in college was asked to play essentially like they ask, like what John Franklin Myers was asked to do last year or what they'll have maybe like Solomon Thomas do for them. He played like 4I in this weird 3-3-5 bullshit Big 12 defense. So he didn't really get a lot of opportunities to rush around the edge. And it was like, well, when he did, he was great in those reps, but how much of a skill set has he developed playing in this stupid system? It seemed a little bit early, and he wasn't like this can't miss prospect by any stretch of the imagination, in my opinion. But either way, I think you're still optimistic about how he fits for all of the reasons we said about Hassan Reddick and the stunts and how, if nothing else, he is a loopy, bendy, explosive rusher that's perfect as that guy off of those stunts. So if for some reason Reddick doesn't fit, like if they don't figure it out and he's not playing, you do have a plan there. Like you can play Will McDonald, or you have Reddick and you now have the availability for Will McDonald to be out there with Reddick. And you can run these stunts on both sides and cause havoc that way. Now you're taking Jermaine Johnson off the field, most likely, if you're doing that. So it's not necessarily ideal, but you do have the option to do that. Ultimately, when he plays, I think he'll be efficient. And he's a nice player to have here, but I do ultimately project that they will work it out with Reddick, and McDonald will be still kind of in this situation where he's just not playing all that much. His snap count might double from last year, but that's still only 300 snaps. And that still is just like kind of tough to swallow if you're a Jets fan. Like, you're kind of all in this Rodgers window, and you took a top 16 pick and spent it on a rotational speed rusher. It's like, it's not great, but I mean, again, the efficiency's there. It's more of it's not really Will McDonald's fault that I don't project too much from him, but it was just kind of a weird pick from the get-go and continues to be a little bit weird, but again, there's ways for him to help out here as well. But let's continue down the edge room before talking about the remaining interior players here. Michael Clemens is still here. He's a really nice backup defensive end to have, and I am curious to see if they use him a little bit more even in that John Franklin Myers role with him gone now, early down kind of 4-tech. He is a huge defensive end, and I actually think with how they craft this front, everything we said in the scheme breakdown about being able to be lighter because how they slant these guys and don't necessarily play the run from a traditional standpoint, he can definitely hold up as a inside shade of the tackle in a wide 9 on first down. So for that reason, I do think he's going to continue to play his 20, 25 snaps a game. But for the most part, I do expect him to come off the field for pass rush downs. That's where his lack of athleticism does show up. He just hasn't been too much of a factor there. And, Jermaine Johnson has really taken a step up as a run defender, by the way. Clemens actually took a lot of snaps away from Jermaine Johnson in their rookie season because Jermaine was struggling against the run. Clemens stepped in like that and was a plus run defender as an edge player, and Johnson has since caught up. He took a big step forward there last year too. But those are kind of your 4 rotational quasi-starters for the edge group. They did sign Talk McKinley, veteran speed presence, maybe a leverage piece on Hassan Reddick a little bit. I don't know, probably won't play if Reddick is available, but you'd probably slide McDonald into Reddick's role, and then McKinley into McDonald's role if Reddick is really going to hold out. Not the worst signing to have in that situation. And then a pair of undrafted rookies did make this team, Eric Watts and Braden McGregor. I'm loosely familiar with both these guys. McGregor was just kind of an effort player at Michigan. And then Eric Watts is huge, dude. He's 6'6", 275 pounds. Kind of fits that Michael Clemens description, if you will. I actually didn't get around to watching him, but fun story, I did take a picture for him and his family at the Senior Bowl on the field, and he was super nice. He just walked down with his family. I was just standing there, and he just walked up to me and shook my hand and was like, "Hi, I'm Eric. Nice to meet you." And I was like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" So cool to see him make the team in a kind of a fun fit for his sort of, I don't want to say he's a tweener skill set, but he is a huge defensive end. And then you really have 3 true interior players other than Quinnen Williams. That starts with Javon Kinlaw, and they gave him a very nice contract, $7.2 million on a 1-year kind of prove-it deal here. So Saleh was there in San Francisco when they traded away DeForest Buckner and then used that pick on Javon Kinlaw to replace him. Saleh obviously thinks the world of him, now bringing him back for the Jets. And the first few years of his time in San Francisco, there's no way around it. He was a first-round bust. Not only was he not as good of a pass rusher as you expected for a guy that had a great first step, length, and power, but never came along as a run defender. And frankly, I didn't love the way he always carried himself. Seemed really immature to me. And it dealt with a lot of injuries too. So he just had a horrible start to his career. But last year, in the 4th year of his career, he actually had like a mini emergence. I don't want to say a breakout, but he was nice for the Niners. As the third guy, the first guy off the bench, he ended up with a 35 pressure, 4 sack season in an identical system. And they need that guy on this team. We've talked so much about stunts. They want Quinnen to either demand a double team or get a one-on-one and win that in a traditional sense. But if they want a guy to just detonate the guard and the tackle, line up as, head up on the guard and kind of just crash himself into the middle of those two players and create rush lanes for these loopers and stuff. He showed in San Francisco in a very limited role, right, that he can at the very least do that. And he can do a little bit as a rusher with his power. He's a nice signing here. And I think, if he just can do what he did last year, that's your Quentin Jefferson replacement, a younger Quentin Jefferson. They got similar production from Jefferson and the same role. Like, Jefferson was that dude for them. Like, even if his production isn't always crazy, he was the guy that would be that disruptor for their stunts. Javon Kinlaw, at the very least, can be that replacement and be younger in that role. But there's upside to this signing too. If he's matured at 27 years old, still has all the physical traits he had as a highly drafted first-round pick, obviously, and Saleh has the faith in him. He's clearly giving him an opportunity to be essentially a full-time starter here. They'll still rotate him a little bit, but that can go a long way if, the guy that basically handpicked you still believes in you and is giving you that opportunity, and he's kind of rejuvenated in a way. There's a world where he kind of has I'll stick with that term, a reemergence as a quality defensive tackle. I think this is as good of a place as he could have gone, and the opportunity's there. So I actually put the up arrow on Javon Kinlaw. Have been hard on him being a first-round bust for the Niners, but he showed some life and deserves at least a second chance here, if you will, with the Jets. And $7.2 million is not nothing, right? But he will rotate a little bit with Solomon Thomas, and I think Thomas will play even maybe a little bit more with John Franklin Myers gone. He is exclusively kind of that four tech, that inside shade of the tackle. He can't really defend the run as a three tech, as a real defensive tackle, and neither can Javon Kinlaw. So they really depend on the scheme to get run defense production from that second defensive tackle. That's kind of their weak link in terms of run defense, though, if you will. But back to the stunt conversation, he's a stunt man, Solomon Thomas. Never developed the true skill set to win as a rusher, but unique movement skills and get off for a 285-pound defensive tackle / defensive end. He was the number 3 pick in the draft for a reason. And it's funny that they now have 2 former first-round busts of the Niners on this defense. And then the last guy we talk about here is an undrafted pickup that might have been the best undrafted pickup of the cycle in Leonard Taylor. Okay, so I know it's just my draft rankings, and they've obviously aged poorly to this point, but just to put a little perspective on it, and I'm not ashamed to say it because it's what I saw before they got drafted. I had Leonard Taylor ranked just behind Braden Fisk, who went in the second round for the Rams, and he ends up going undrafted. Now, I think there's pretty clearly some sort of maturity question marks. There was a lack of development from him at Miami. His final season was just overall disappointing. But even within that final year, I still saw the traits, the shed strength, good feet. Like, he can absolutely emerge as someone that can actually play run defense for this team. And he has an opportunity to do that this year. Because you could argue, even if he's raw and even if you've got questions about how he played in his final year, and he has a long way to go before he's a starter, and he has a long way to go in terms of pass rush too. Like, he really does not have a plan or any semblance of knowing what he's doing in that phase. He's just all athleticism and power, and even then, he doesn't really win with it. But you could make an argument he is the best run defender on the interior other than Quinnen Williams. So really exciting opportunity for an undrafted player. It's a good room for him to come in and compete with great coaching, and a young dude too. Like, he can absolutely kind of figure things out in the NFL. I do think he absolutely should have been drafted. I don't think he's a bad kid. I just don't know that he's fully figured everything out in terms of professionalism. And that's all speculation, but you see a guy with this talent, with his pedigree, the lack of production, and then falling to the 7th round, 99% of the time, something's going on there, right? So pulling for him. We'll see what they can get from him. And that rounds out this defensive line. It's the conversation kind of goes in a lot of different directions just as they use these guys, sending them all over the place from different alignments. But ultimately, it's a really good defensive line, has a chance to be an elite one. We'll see what Reddick does and how some of these kind of up arrows result, if you will. But the floor, I think, is top 10 for this defensive line, at least. And then the linebackers are a fantastic duo. I think from a just logistical standpoint, a linebacker duo that just makes sense together in terms of putting complementary skill sets together. This might be the most pleasing in that regard. I mean, you have the smart, savvy vet, the full-sized guy in CJ Mosley, and then you have the aggressive, heat-seeking missile that's just allowed to play fast and not necessarily worry as much about discipline in Quincy Williams. And these two together, I think you could argue were the third best linebacking duo in the league last year, and now ranks second now that the Ravens have opened up some questions with their LB2 spot. So second for overall linebacker. In terms of coverage, they rank third. And for linebacker run defense, they are a little bit lower, but still top 10 or so, 4th to 11th there. So CJ Mosley has been such an underrated player for a long time. He's a guy that his PFF grades for a while were pretty bad there, but I'm proud to say, like, in this series, I would always come in here and say, like, I know his grades are bad, but, like, his tape looks pretty good to me, and his coverage feel is so special, man. Like, he is not a great athlete, especially at this point in his career, but, he's not the fastest guy. He doesn't have the most oily, fluid hips and this crazy range and coverage, but he is clearly one of the smartest, highest IQ zone defenders in the league. He just feels that space so well. He knows how offenses are attacking him, and not only do you see on film, like, he's taking away throwing lanes, forcing the quarterback, whether it's, a play action crosser or an RPO or whatever it is, the quarterback wants to go in a certain direction, and Mosley is forcing negative plays on the offense because the QB has to go elsewhere, or it was an RPO, and he thought he was going to be able to get Mosley on it, and the quarterback has to eat a sack or throw the ball away or whatever. You see those plays where he's not necessarily getting targeted or putting a stat on the, stat sheet, but you watch the film and you're like, he took that play away. That was really smart coverage on his end. But his production's also really good and underrated. He's been top 5 back-to-back seasons in pass breakups. It might not sound like much, but he has 11 pass breakups over the last 2 years, 5 last year, 6 the year before that. If you get your hands on 4 footballs over the course of a season as a linebacker, that's impressive. This is an impossible position to play right now. So he is doing it as consistently as anybody in the league, even if there are plays where his physical limitations do result. Like, if he has to pick up a crosser or run up the seam, like, he has his limitations in terms of speed and range. So he's not an elite coverage defender, but he's top 10 for coverage for linebackers. And from a run defense perspective, what's not to say, man? He is incredibly high IQ. He wants it. He has the technique and the play strength to get off blocks. And I mentioned it in the scheme breakdown, but if you're going to have this chaotic front where you're muddying things up, you need a linebacker that can see it, that can work around blocks, can get off blocks, meet guards oftentimes, and get in the mud and make plays. And he has absolutely handled that in this Robert Saleh defense. So he's fantastic. Right in the mix for, like, top 5 linebacker in the league, in my opinion. And then Quincy Williams as his running mate is a ton of fun. Also fun that he's Quinnen Williams' brother. Like, how cool is that? But there's not a better term for him than heat-seeking missile. I mean, they allow him to play fast because you have the disciplined CJ Mosley next to him. And, yeah, you might get some coverage busts. He might take the wrong angle and end up in a bad spot and miss a few more tackles than you'd like. There are, like, some negative plays on film for him for sure, but way more positive ones. I mean, he did lead the league in pass breakups last year at 8. He shattered the league for defensive stops because of that playmaking ability. So he had 80 defensive stops. That was first in the league for linebackers. Second and third place were 71 and 70, so he had 9 more than those guys. And then fourth only had 61. So he was in a whole different stratosphere for the amount of plays he was making around the line of scrimmage. He also forced 2 fumbles. Man, he is just a playmaker. And I don't know whether to put the up arrow on him or not, if he can sustain that. If he does, the up arrow should be going up on him. It's kind of a weird random position at times. And again, I don't want to just put the up arrow on everybody. I don't necessarily expect Quincy Williams to be better than he was last year. I'm not ruling it out or to even repeat what he did last year. Like if we come in next year and he repeats this performance, he's going to be, an 85 overall as opposed to the 80 we have him at right now. But I will say this, for what he did last year, the fact that Patrick Queen made the Pro Bowl over him is exactly why we need to end public voting for the Pro Bowl. Patrick Queen had a fine enough season, but Quincy Williams was, if the Pro Bowl is based on production, there was not a better linebacker from a production standpoint than Quincy Williams last year. So that was horrible. Now, fortunately, the voters were paying attention. He was first team All-Pro. So the real Pro Bowl, if you will, he did get his respect. I don't know. There might be some Jets fans that say I underrate him here as an 80 overall. And honestly, that's fair. It's just that was a wild season he had. I don't know if he'll be able to repeat it, but we'll see. I hope he does. And then in terms of depth, I love that they're just keeping the same guys here. And they actually have some interesting names. And I love that they're keeping the same guys because this is the best linebacker coaching that anybody in the league could get. I think it's a big part of why Quincy is at the level he's playing at. And honestly, C.J. Mosley is probably playing the best ball of his career. But between Ulbrich and Saleh, these guys know their linebackers. But Jamian Sherwood is a converted safety type, undersized, but kind of in that Quincy Williams mold, if you will. They will play him occasionally in like base 4-3 packages. They don't run a lot of that because they do have a really good slot corner. They just want to stay in nickel all the time. But he'll play a little bit, but I think the arrow can be pointing up on him because of what we said about the coaching and the continuity here. He played well when he did play last year. I was always intrigued by this pick because he wasn't a great safety, but definitely felt like a linebacker conversion made sense for him. So I think him as your first guy in, at least in a Quincy Williams injury situation, would be just fine. I don't think he can do what C.J. Mosley does, but I would be curious if maybe Chaz Surratt could. He's really interesting to me. I loved his tape at UNC. Former quarterback, really smart coverage player, does a lot of the similar stuff Mosley does in terms of that smart, disciplined zone defense where he might not necessarily be the best athlete, but consistently takes stuff away and navigates his way in front of passing lanes. And he's interesting because he was, I think, a 5th-round pick in that very last Rick Spielman, Mike Zimmer draft before that regime got wiped. And then they just kind of went forward with their own guys. And Surratt never really got an opportunity as a young linebacker coming in, and then he gets tagged with, he was a 5th-round pick that got cut, and he now he's up against it in terms of opportunities. But he's back here. I remember him on Hard Knocks last year. I can't remember if he made the 53 last year or if he was on the practice squad. He did end up playing in 3 games and got 9 snaps last year. But he does make the 53 again this year. And again, he hasn't really shown anything in the league, but I liked him as a prospect, and I love him now in getting a second year of this coaching. Just, I think an interesting name there, someone to keep an eye on. And then Zaire Barnes as well, recently drafted by this organization. So all these guys are kind of in the draft and develop mode, which is smart when they have the coaching that they do. So it's a really fun linebacker room. The talent on this roster continues. But as if it wasn't good enough, we wrap up this roster breakdown with the best group of them all. This secondary is the best secondary in the NFL, capped off by, without debate, the best cornerback trio in the league. I think I can't say it's not even close because I think Miami signing Kendall Fuller is an upgrade over Xavier Howard, and depending how Cater Coho takes a step forward in year 3, maybe they get into the mix. But at this point in time, Reed is better than Fuller, Michael Carter is better than Coho, and Sauce Gardner is better than Jalen Johnson. So even if you mention Miami, it's not a debate. The Jets are number 1. It is a fun little divisional discussion there, though, and the cornerback trios in this division are nutty. But Not only is Sauce Gardner better than Jalen Ramsey, he's better than every corner in the league. And there as well, I would say there's just not really a debate. Before you even talk about the stats, I mean, his film is insane. Even if he isn't like the fastest guy or like the most fluid athlete or has the most insane agility and foot speed, it's more than good enough to complement really across the board, like truly elite at everything else you want at the position. Length, elite. Physicality, elite. Anticipation from zone coverage, elite. He is super IQ. He knows what teams are trying to do. He will jump stuff to take it away, but he doesn't do that while getting over aggressive and exposing himself to double moves either. Technique, elite. He has that trait you talk about man to man where he uses his length to slow guys down, and people are like, oh, he grabs all the time. No, he doesn't grab. He will float that arm out there as like a bumper in a subtle way that slows down the opposing corner. He uses that to slow down the opposing receiver, and he can kind of steal their speed in many ways. Like if someone's running faster than you and you put your arm on them, you're going to slow them down, and that momentum will help you run faster. But there's a way to do that without consistently drawing flags, right? Like that is actually something that corners should do and do all the time. But the corners that do that a lot, maybe L'Jarius Sneed, Shavarius Ward, Xavier Howard, they're going to get 7, 10, 12 penalties a year. Back-to-back years, Sauce Gardner has only gotten 5. So there's a way to do it without getting flagged. And people are always like, oh, Sauce is too grabby. It's like, no, he's crafty and smart. Honestly, the only knock on him is he hasn't been able to consistently convert pass breakups into interceptions. And that has, frankly, probably led to the casuals saying he's overrated because he only has 2 interceptions. He didn't have any last year. But he has more pass breakups than anybody in the league over the last 2 years. His yards allowed per game is by far the best in the league. He's in the top 5 for reception percentage allowed over the last 2 years, was number 1 last year, 18th this last year. But you have to remember, the Jets also run a lot of cover 4. So a lot of those receptions, if you load them up on film, you're like, okay, well, he's playing top down, and it was a 2-yard completion to the flat. Like, they're literally saying, Sauce, go allow that. So, yes, when the Jets are, leading the league in cover 4 like they did last year, you're going to get some of that in terms of reception percentage. And that's why cornerback stats are always so hard. But there are ones you can look at, and wherever you look, Sauce is, with a bullet, the best corner in the NFL. And another cool thing is I mentioned they play a lot of quarters, and yes, there will be maybe 50, 60% of the time they are playing them off, and they're going to allow those underneath receptions, but they have the flexibility to press him from quarters, which is a very dangerous assignment. If you press from quarters, you're basically on the outside of your defense. You're running cover 0 without the blitzing element. Right? If you run cover 0, the idea is you just got to cover for 2.5 seconds. Our 6-man rush is going to get home. But from quarters, you're often rushing 4. And if you leave a guy on an island on the outside in press and they get beat over the top, those safeties are focused on the slot wide receivers and the intermediate, the short, the middle of the field. They're not focused on those go balls. So if you press from quarters and you get beat, that's a touchdown. Well, you want to know how many touchdowns Sauce has allowed in each of his last 2 seasons? 1. Just 1. And that has a force multiplying effect on the rest of these guys. If they run cover 4, they can say, all right, Sauce Island is over there. The rest of the defense can kind of collapse those zones in. You can shift your attention on everybody else. You get a numbers advantage. Guys can play aggressive. The opposing quarterback starts to get that sinking feeling of it's like, okay, I either have, with this great pass rush coming at me, I have this Jets secondary, lurking underneath, or I have to force it outside to Sauce. Those are horrible options. So, Broncos fans, I love you. I love Pat Surtain. He can be the second best corner in the league. That's fine. But to me, at this point in time, there just is not currently a debate. I can really never say there's a shutdown corner in the modern NFL, but if there is one, it is Sauce Gardner. But what's crazy is not only do they have the best number 1 corner in the NFL, they have the best number 2 corner in the NFL in DJ Reed. Like, I went through all of them, especially now that L'Jarius Sneed has gone in Kansas City and Carlton Davis has gone in Tampa. I mean, you're putting DJ Reed up there with, I think like Greg Newsome in Cleveland. That's probably as close as I would put it. Tariq Woolen in the conversation. We'll see what Woolen plays like this year. Roger McCreary maybe for the Titans. Nice player, but I think I'd rather have DJ Reed. And Deron Bland, who's a little bit more polarizing, gives up more in coverage, but more of a playmaker. Okay, worst case scenario, DJ Reed is the 5th best number 2 corner in the league, opposite of the best. So that's where you're at with DJ Reed. And he's unique because a lot of these like 5'9" corners are like Darius Williams. And Darius Williams is great in his own right too. But DJ Reed has one thing Williams doesn't have in that he's just as fast, just as fluid, just as good as that like high Q off zone corner where you play him in space and he can jump stuff. But Reed has more physicality. He's rocked up. He can actually get in your face and press a little bit more than Darius Williams, and is really physical at the catch point. Can actually smash with some of these bigger wide receivers. He does have a height disadvantage, but he's not going to back down from a fight. So he's just an all-around complete player, but he's perfect opposite of Sauce too, because if you're talking about that quarter structure where you're leaving Sauce kind of on an island and you're shifting all the coverage away from him, well, that safety to DJ Reed's side is going to be a little bit, more in a position where he can help Reed over the top. So Reed can collapse down a little bit more, play some of those underneath throws, be a little bit more aggressive to go jump stuff. So he's just the perfect fit here. And then Michael Carter is just a top 5 to 8 slot corner. I mean, definitely top 5 in terms of like true slot corners. When you start to throw in guys like Trent McDuffie and Kyle Hamilton, some of these guys that play other positions too, it gets a little more muddy, but super consistent player. Really a lot of like speed for a slot corner. From a down-to-down like coverage production standpoint last year, he was actually the best coverage slot corner last year. Now, I don't think he's quite the run defender that guys like Mike Hilton and Kenny Moore and Brian Branch are, which when you're talking about a slot corner, I do think that matters. That helps you live in nickel really well. Not that he's bad in run defense, but not quite what those guys are. And I do think he gets a very favorable situation, especially for a slot corner. With all this surrounding talent around him, it's not a huge knock on him. Again, we're saying he's top 5, and if he continues to produce like he did last year, he's very quickly going to climb even further. But I mean, Jesus Christ, if your questions about the cornerback room are whether or not Michael Carter is a top 5 slot corner in the league, you're in a ridiculous spot. It's a rare cornerback trio. And then you have some interesting depth. I mean, Brandon Echols didn't play much because these guys did stay really healthy last year. That's unlikely to happen again. So, something to think about at least. I mean, while the Jets got obliterated on the offensive side of the ball, the defense did mostly stay healthy. Not a lot of secondaries make it through a whole season fully healthy like that. So the probability of a guy like Brandon Echols or Quantez Stiggers playing are higher. But I don't hate those guys as depth. Echols just... he's an exciting, speedy corner. I think has a lot of potential. And the fact that he's kind of sustained this first man in role here in this coaching staff, I think is, tells you that he could get in there and play pretty well for this defense. I don't think they're too worried if they have to go to Brandon Echols, whether it's in the slot or outside, if they have to go to him for 2 or 3 weeks. Now, any extended period of time and it's a different conversation. But then they also take Quantez Stiggers, 5th round pick right out of the CFL. I don't watch a lot of CFL, but I think he won their Rookie of the Year award. And I didn't have CFL tape. I don't really have any grounds based on what I've watched on him to tell you how good of a player he is. But I do know that people are really excited about him. Had real diamond in the rough potential. And for the Jets to like him is, a good sign because more often than not, the corners that they handpick are successful. And then they also have Jarek Bernard Converse. Wasn't really a room for him to play last year, but he was a raw developmental LSU corner last year. So, three guys very much in the athletic developmental mold for corners, but any number of those guys could turn into players. It wouldn't really surprise me. It's fine for a cornerback depth. And then, their safety room is fine. It's not enough. When your cornerback room is as good as it is, there's no like true weaknesses with these secondaries for me to say that takes them down from being the best secondary in the league. But there are certainly a lot better safety rooms, but it's not really something I'm worried about. I think both these guys are very solid. Chuck Clark, Tony Adams, and they have some decent depth, but we'll start with Chuck Clark. They signed him. They wanted him to come in as their starting safety last year. He went down. He was the one guy in this defense that did get hurt last year. Pretty sure it was an ACL, but he's had more than enough time to recover. He takes the starting job back, and he's a solid player. He's not the most athletic dude from a coverage perspective. He's smart. He's often in the right place, but you're just not going to get a ton of playmaking from him on the back end. But the communication should be pretty sound. He is a really consistent run defender, so he's kind of a last line of defense for them. Can help prevent big plays. Not going to get shredded in coverage, and not going to let you pass 20 yards. It's a fine enough player to have back there. And then Tony Adams in year 3. Nobody knows who Tony Adams is. Came into the league undrafted out of Illinois. We talked about him in the deep dive last year as being an interesting player for this defense. They started him over Adrian Amos, right? Was something we talked about. Like, okay, there's no reason he can't be good. He's got really good athletic testing. They like him. And he ended up starting essentially the whole season for them last year. Missed a couple weeks for injury, but he had 3 picks. Pretty solid in coverage, nothing really special. Pretty good in run defense. Like, he's a year 3 guy with a lot of athleticism. I think the arrow is still pointing up. I don't know that he'll ever be a superstar, but there's no physical limitations to tell you why he couldn't be. I'm not necessarily excited about Tony Adams, but I'm definitely not worried about him starting. And then I like their depth. I like Ashton Davis. I think he's a solid coverage player. I really do. I think he's got the speed and instincts back there, and that showed. He had 3 picks last year in 110 coverage snaps as a bit of a rotation, and they started to get him on the field more and more. Was in the 4th year of his rookie contract, was a 3rd-round pick. He's had his ups and downs. They eventually kind of moved on from him as the starter because his run defense was just not good enough, and I think he's kind of battled some injuries, but they did actually bring him back, which was maybe a minor surprise. But I think as a depth piece, like if he's got to step in and start and even long-term, like I wouldn't be horribly worried about him. I think he's a nice depth piece. And Isaiah Oliver is just a really good, balanced defensive back. Oliver can also be a part of your cornerback depth, at least as a slot corner. He played in this defense for the Niners last year, was really good from the slot. Just someone that gets banged up a lot, but, a couple of nice players to have. This is a really special unit, even if the safeties aren't sensational. And, that rounds out your positional breakdowns. I hope you can see why I think this Jets team is so special, why I'm high on this team. And I have them as my 2nd overall defense. Now, I said we were going to circle back to that discussion about Hassan Reddick. So for those that have followed the series, the Browns actually came in as my 2nd-ranked defense. But as I've discussed, as I watch the film, do my research for every team, these ratings are subject to slide up and down a little bit. That pass rush grade was originally 2nd to 4th. Now it's 4th to 6th. Bumped it down a little bit on Reddick, and that was enough to slide their defense below it. I will reiterate, I am going to publish for free my final spreadsheet with the team rankings and all the splits on my Patreon. It'll be a public post there. If while you're over there at patreon.com/thatfranchiseguy, if you want to support the channel, get exclusive content. I just last week published my list of guys I'm targeting and fading in fantasy football. Hell, there's 4 spots left in our slow draft fantasy league. If you want to rush over, the $1 level patrons get access to that. The fantasy board is on the $5 level, but did want to let you guys know what's going on over at Patreon. But anyway, back to the Jets. My 2nd-ranked overall defense, 2nd for pass defense. And then from a run defense perspective, I think they're going to be really good there too. Ranking 5th, they were probably closer to like 10th to 14th last year in run defense, but they were on the field so freaking much, right? And they had these games where they were just getting gashed. I mean, when you're in a week 12 game and you know you have no chance and you're down 3 scores in the third quarter and teams are just running the ball right at you, it's hard to sustain great run defense throughout the course of the season, as much as Robert Saleh did motivate this group to play good defense for the scope of the season. But they were still, I want to say, 7th in lowest success rate for opposing rushing defense. So, like, I think the signs were still in there. Like, even last year when they wanted to stop the run, they absolutely could. And I think that can take a step up this year, not having to defend the run quite as much and being a little bit more fresh for that. So they do come in 5th there for run defense. Overall, just obviously a super complete defense. And they're complete on special teams too, man. Like, the roster is just absurd. Like, Greg Zuerlein had an awesome year last year. Thomas Morstead has been super sound, like a top 10 punter, like year in, year out. They ranked 4th for me for my special teams rankings. Just such a complete football team. And even factoring in a lot of the injury stuff, putting them, I think, about as close to their floor as you're going to find as the 14th best offense in the league, that is plenty enough when this defense is as good as they are. But as we look at the strengths, weaknesses, and those pivotal factors one more time, it's a really unique chart here. We haven't seen a team like this. I mean, that list of strengths is hilariously long. Quarterback, offensive line, running back, defensive coaching, pass rush, linebackers, elite secondary, special teams. It's the whole fucking team, man. It is a strength. The weakness is offensive coaching, but then the wild cards are almost entirely health related. None more important than that one Achilles tendon attached to Aaron Rodgers' leg. But you also have durability questions on the offensive line. Mike Williams is a pivotal factor for the weaponry, all of which we discussed. And that all just puts so much polarization on this stuff. There is a world where the rock bottom injury situation does happen again. If literally Rodgers is out for the year by week 3, Tyron Smith goes down week 2, and Mike Williams tears another ACL, yes, this is going to be maybe not quite as bad as they were offensively last year, but still a bottom 10 offense in the league quite clearly. That does seem a little dramatic to me, and I think as we have them ranked, factoring in some durability concerns, that's how you end up with them as more of a mid offense. But dude, if they stay healthy and those guys are there and look good, you're talking about pairing a potential top 5 to 8 offense with an absurd defensive, just defense. I mean, it's not just the roster. The coaching is great on that side of the ball. The only other wild card other than the durability concerns with the offense is Hassan Reddick. And I think we broke that down. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean they have a horrible floor. Like, I don't see D-line ever being a weakness for the Jets. But it could it be less of a strength, so to speak, if Reddick's not available for them? Yes, absolutely. So there's some kind of non-football related wild cards for this team, but the assembly of this team is really special. And if you look at the schedule here, man, I'm not going to say they have it easy, but it ain't too bad. I mean, I don't love starting in San Francisco Monday Night Football. They are underdogs in that game. But after that, I mean, they should be sitting at 4-1, man. At Tennessee, New England, Denver, at Minnesota. And then, you know, you're playing capable teams, but teams that I think they're better than. Buffalo, at Pittsburgh, at New England again. They do host Houston. That'll be a really fun game. But then at Arizona, the second worst defense in the league now that the Rams are giving away their good players. The Colts at home, week 11. They get the bye week. They host Seattle instead of having to go to Seattle. Like, maybe they do have it easy. This is not a bad schedule for the Jets, man. Things do definitely get a little bit harder there at Miami, week 14. At the Jags, week 15. They host the Rams. They got to go to Buffalo and then host Miami. The final 5 is a bit of a harder stretch, but man, my projection on them has them at 11 wins, basically 10.8 wins. I like the alternate line on the Jets at 10.5. Their over-under is 9.5. I would go bet the over 10.5 on this team. I would. Depends on your tolerance for their injury risk, of course. But I like all these odds, man, especially the Super Bowl odds at 18-1. I just feel like the upside on this team really is the best team in the league. So to get them with the 10th best Super Bowl odds, some of the risk is baked in there, but the reward is tremendous. Division odds at plus 160, probably the worst value-wise, just because Miami and Buffalo are really good football teams. So I would say bet the over in the Super Bowl odds, not necessarily the division odds. But it shouldn't come as a huge surprise when everybody going into this video knew I was high on the Jets that I like their over. But I think because of the Aaron Rodgers hate bandwagon and the fact that it's the Jets, people are scared to bet these, and you're getting value on the gambling market because of that. So I like it, man. But that is going to do it. I want to hear from you guys. This was going to be a big one. A lot of people thought I was crazy for having the Jets 5. So did I convince you? Am I a biased Aaron Rodgers homer? If so, let me have it. Let me hear from you guys. Drop those comments down below. Who do you guys think comes in at number 4 in these power rankings? That was a really fun one. I had to re-record this because basically from the Aaron Rodgers segment on, this file got corrupted, so I'm doing this entire recording basically again here. So that was fun, but it actually was. I enjoyed this one. I hope you guys did too. We'll see you guys soon for the next deep dive. Please hit that like button on the way out, and peace out.